Hi, welcome to the Indie Wine Podcast. My name is Matt Wood, and this is episode 73. I recently had a great chat with Diego Perez of Zumo Wines. Diego has worked with some of the most well-known natural wine shops and bars, including Oakland's own Ordinaire. Zumo started in 2018 making strictly 0-0 wines. When possible, Diego farms the sites himself, and we discuss his farming and winemaking in his new home in Yuba County. We also, of course, talk about why you should support California wines. A quick reminder that there's a Patreon at patreon.com/IndieWinePodcast. The link is in the show notes also. Any amount to help me keep telling wine stories ad-free and available for everyone is appreciated. Telling a friend is a great way to help out too. Here we go.
And that was kind of the first time that I had gone in and worked with anybody on a vineyard, and it was cool. So Caleb and I have known each other for a long time, and he's an angel.
Awesome. Yeah, tell me about what's been your journey in wine as far as what kind of got you into it in the first place.
It's been I'd say fermentation I was definitely more into before I was into wine. I brewed beer when I was in high school just because I wanted to, because it was annoying, hey buddying, a specific beer. You'd be like, can you please get me a Chimay, the one with the blue label and not the, whatever, just these annoying things. And I was kind of a snob about it. So I just started brewing my own beer, and then I just kind of thought that was weird how there were, I don't know, it's like baking, it's just really specific amounts of everything and pitching yeast. And I kind of got into, I saw Sandor Katz give a lecture on sauerkraut and just wild fermentation. And I grew up in Providence, Rhode Island.
Okay.
In
so
a warehouse space there.
Fermentation kind of stuff?
Yeah, and I bought his book, and so I'd make pickles and kimchi and that sort of. And then eventually I played music, and I would tour quite a bit, and I used to make little health beverages for everybody, with kind of apple cider vinegar and honey and water, but I'd get the honey from wherever we were on the road,
oh, cool.
And trying to just keep everybody, but it was mainly just so I could continue doing fermentation. So I'd have my little spot in the van for doing that. And then one thing led to another. I opened a restaurant when I was really young.
Okay.
And it was BYOB. And I didn't really think that much of wine, but the food called for wine. And so people would come in with wine all the time, and they'd always be sharing wine with me. And I don't know, I just didn't really like any of it until one day somebody poured me this crazy wine. And I was like, what the fuck? That doesn't taste anything like all the rest of the wine that people normally give me. What is this? And I searched it down, and it was it was Patapon, the Pinot Denis from
okay, yeah.
But the original guy, because now his wife makes the wines, because he died. I think Christian Chaussard. So I don't know what vintage it would have been, 08 or 09 or something. And it blew my mind. And then I really wanted to learn more about just natural wine and what was up with it, and started making some in my, just wine in my apartment.
Okay.
But
what were you doing for grapes? Or were you doing apples or something?
Well, I'd made cider and stuff too. But grape wine. Because growing up in New England, we had endless amounts of apples. So it was, the cider came first. I don't really and my family are from a part of Spain where they drink pretty wild cider from Asturias. So I had like grown up drinking that. So liked kind of funky wild cider, but I didn't know that that was a thing with wine. And I just bought these, like it was Carignan from God knows where. Like, you know, I didn't know shit about California or California wine, like growing regions for that matter. but it was Carignan that I bought at all the old Italian guys. They all make wine in their basement, and like these huge carboys growing up, and all the old Portuguese guys. And so it was one of those kind of shops. I bought a bunch of Carignan and one of those big buckets that people put like kegs in at keg parties, and I used that for fermentation and fermented it in my apartment. I had a basket press, and I made like 25 gallons of wine that year.
It's a pretty good amount for your first time out.
Yeah, it was a lot, and it was fun. My friend Josh, who later started importing wine, and he has a company called Percy Selections. He was going to Brown University, which is in Providence, and he used to eat at my restaurant, and then he was really into wine, and he'd done all this traveling all over the place, tasting all these cool wines with people, and he'd send me boxes of wine all the time with just like fantastic shit. That was really cool. But he tasted the wines. He was like, wow, you made this in your apartment? That's so cool. Like, where the fuck did you even get these grapes? And da-da-da-da. And then so that was my first time. That was around like 2012, I guess.
Okay. And so you've been in the hospitality business quite a while then, it sounds like.
Yeah. And even, I mean, before that, I like worked at like Ben & Jerry's and at like, sandwich shops and stuff like that, and like grocery stores. And so it's been a lifetime of service, so to speak. I had a restaurant for like 5 years, and then pulled the plug on that. It was kind of a mixed decision of not wanting to do it anymore, and just like Providence is very like provincial, and like there's a lot of like nepotism and like straight up like mobby kind of stuff, and it was just a lot of shit went down.
Okay, just a little too much to deal with sometimes.
Yeah, and it's a small town. I had grown up there, and my whole life was there. I kind of split time between there and New York City, just depending on where I could find work. But then shut the restaurant down and went to New York and worked at 10 Bells in Manhattan.
Okay,
and was there for a little over a year. And then Bradford from Ordinaire had mentioned that if I ever wanted to move to California, that I could probably get a job working there. And then Quinn, who opened up Psychic Wine in LA, was leaving, and I moved out here in 2016 to work there, and just for a change of pace.
Okay.
And also to get closer to the vines, like the access of fruit and stuff. I also made wine from some Riccazzatelli, actually, that
interesting,
was grown in Massachusetts.
Okay.
And but at that time, especially organic vineyards in the Northeast, I mean, everyone was just fighting over them. And I think they still are. I mean, there were a bunch of people in New York wine that are like, why organic farming isn't the most important thing about natural wine or something,
Got
you know?
it. Okay.
I'm like, okay, whatever, dude, you know? I mean, and I get it, because, I mean, I have friends that farm out there, and I've done like a little bit of help on some vineyards on the East Coast. And yeah, you're up against just everything. Like,
yeah, a lot of different challenges than here, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, there used to be so much like hybridizing of grapes in that area back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like
for sure.
like Erie,
and that would be fun.
Massachusetts also.
Yeah, and yeah, New York and Massachusetts. I mean, it'd be cool to, at one point, that was kind of like a dream of mine, was to sort of make new hybrids, because the ones that are in place. Nothing against them, but it's like, how can we make Cabernet Sauvignon in Vermont?
Right. Yeah.
They're not really thinking like, how do we make like a lighter, brighter, like a red wine that we can get to full phenolic ripeness in like just 3 months of summer. So
Right. Yeah, and with the disease pressure and all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so you came out to California, and yeah, what'd you think of the place?
I'd visited a few times. I liked it. I especially once I started to have a relationship with like some cool people that were making wine out here, and that was a really huge thing for me, was to just like try and establish relationships with people like Caleb, or who I met through Tony. And I don't know, it was just cool. And like, yeah, Chris Brockway, just like really sweet people who had open hearts for letting people in on what it is they're doing. And like Chad Hines at Iroquois.
Right.
They were all just so sweet. And so eventually, after visiting a bunch of people, Ordinary, we used to do these, and they still do, but I don't work there anymore. They do the like a monthly field trip, and especially at that time, we were going like once a month to go and visit like all kinds of different producers from like. I mean, I always wanted to go to like some heavy hitting like conventional producers, just because I think it would have been really fun, because I mean, we went to some that like, not to name any names, that I was just kind of like, I don't really know how much this is like, in line with our like kind of general view of, and it's not just like, do you use sulfites? Do you work with organic fruit? Do you use like native fermentation? It's also kind of the politics of it all is like really important to me too.
In what way?
Like the original, like kind of like European natural winemakers that I had like heard about and that I like started to learn about, like Olivier Cousin or something, were these like true environmental radicalists,
Okay.
and they weren't like, and like very anti-capitalist, and like not so much like the whole, you're creating a product that bucks a multi-billion-dollar industry, and you can either choose to insert yourself into that conversation and try and get some of that money, or continue to be on the outside of it on purpose, as a direct almost protest to the multi-billion-dollar wine industry that has like glycerin in the wine, and the wines just don't taste good, and they just don't have love. And especially working in service for that long with these kinds of wines, the amount of people who that's their expectation of what wine should be. And I know wine. I drink bottles of wine that are worth more than anything you'll ever have in your whole life, and this wine is gone bad, and it's a delicious bottle of wine, and people would say that all the time. And I don't know. So then, yeah, like there are some people who they just, they make natural-ish wine, but they kind of insert themselves into a different conversation. And it was fun to visit them too, but just after meeting all these different people in California, making wine, after about a year, I like kind of helped Chad out at Iroquois. That was when he was Method Sauvage in Richmond, much to Noel's disapproval, because at that time, that space was only Noel, Chad, Martha Stuman, and I guess Craig had started making wine there too, but he was kind of just helping Noel.
Okay. Yeah, I remember helping Chad bottle a few times there. That was kind of how I met him. And
when that guy who looked like Buster Scruggs had come in with the crazy machines, or those days, or
it was probably maybe the version right after that. It was a
Okay.
regular portable line. I mean,
Okay.
It was a legit line, I guess.
So yeah, Chad, I helped him out a little bit, and then he was like, you can make a few barrels of wine, and that was in 2018, and I did.
Nice.
And yeah, Noel was all pissed though, but because he really didn't want other people to go in there. But then it eventually kind of opened up the floodgates for that place to just be a lot of different people going in and out of there. And yeah, and I've been making wine ever since.
Yeah, what'd you start with those first years? Is that how you met Tom?
Yeah, so it was the year before, in 2017, I had reached out. I was just like looking on winebusiness.com, the elite shopping place for winemakers in California. And there was just a vineyard up that had Verdelho, and I really liked Verdelho. I thought it was weird that he had it, and I was curious. I think even he specified Verdelho from Madeira, which is what I thought was weird about it, because I knew that there was other Verdelho in California, but it's different than Verdelho from Madeira. They just like call a shit ton of grapes Verdelho in Portugal, but they really don't have anything to do with each other. So like, but the one that's at like most of the vineyards in Lodi and stuff is not the same one that Tom has. And so I went to go look at it and talk to him a little bit. And then I realized that I didn't know shit about when harvest would be. Like I had only been in California I moved here in October of 2016, so that was less than a year. And he was like, "Oh, well, you got to come get the grapes next week." And I was like, "What the fuck are you talking about?"
Yeah, stuff gets right early out there too.
Yeah, it does. And you know, and I just wasn't prepared and had no plan that year. And I just said, "Oh, well, I can't do this." And so, you know, maybe next time. And he emailed me the next year. And I went back out there and asked him a little bit more, and it turned out that, yeah, the Verdelho that he had, his neighbor was an old Portuguese guy who came from Madeira, and he brought the clippings for Tom to graft onto the vine. So he like suitcased them over, and they're pretty special. And so I made wine from that year.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, I didn't realize that. That's how it got there.
Yeah, it's pretty unusual because it seems kind of not antithetical to Tom's like kind of zone over there in his sort of world. I don't know, just like philosophies and stuff. But he loved that guy, and just they were best friends. Yeah, so I made some Verdelho that year, and then I had also made friends with this guy, Julian Ergelet, who makes wine now, the Ergelet Brothers wines.
Yeah, they're good guys.
Yeah, they're great. And so Julian had a vineyard in really close to Tom's, like right next door, that had Muscat, and I really liked the wines, like from kind of like when I was thinking about like what kind of wine would I make in California, like the closest things that I could think of like climatically that were wines that I had enjoyed were kind of from like the Roussillon and sort of like South France, in like Pyrenees, and like my family's from Spain, so like there was kind of like also I like Spanish wine too, and so I wanted like really ripe red grapes and Muscat to make kind of like a sort of Conta Manana, like Alan Castex kind of thing. And I got the Muscat from Julian and some Tempranillo from Matthew Rorick in Calaveras.
Okay, yeah.
And that's what I made that year. And just had one the other day. I'm out. Like we only made, I don't know, I think it was like 75 cases in total, both wines that year.
Really? Okay.
And I'm broke as hell, so I definitely sold every last bottle that I could to pay my bills and do all that stuff. And yeah, it was pretty cool. But I had one the other day, and it was really good. So
that's awesome. What was your kind of philosophy going in that first year? And you've always been 0-0 with the wines?
Yeah, I mean, everybody that I had worked just like helping out. In my apartment. That was always pretty important to me, mainly just because I don't know. When you clean with sulfite, it's like disgusting. Like, and I can always taste it in wine. I don't necessarily think that it's like it's not the worst thing that people put in wine, you know. And I do think that there's like a lot of hate that goes on sulfur. I just had never even considered putting it in the wine because that wasn't the kind of wine that I like to drink. For the most part, like I could count on one hand the people that put sulfite in their wine that I like enjoy their wine, you know? So the approach that year was just, figuring out how to use half of the stuff that was there that I was borrowing and just like getting used to pallet jacking things around and, and working on much bigger fermentations than I had done in the past. Like I had gotten married, and for my wedding, I made like 50 gallons of like basically like mead, but it was like ginger flavored.
Okay.
And so I'd done
That's
that.
a lot, yeah. 50 gallons.
Yeah.
Of
and
mead
then so the
is
barrel,
a pretty decent amount.
yeah, we like kegged it up and it was pretty good.
Okay,
And
nice.
it was just like really a friend of mine had bees and he just gave me a bunch of like pounds and pounds of honey. And so it was free. But I don't know. Like it was a big learning experience. I don't really think I like remembered anything that I would have learned that year, but just getting like familiar with working in a space that's shared with a lot of people and what that means. And I was happy with the result and just kept it clean and tried to get barrels from people that didn't like sulfur wick their barrels or hold them with like some people put some weird stuff in there, so just like I was pretty and still am like pretty dogmatic about the sulfite thing, but don't care if other people put it in there.
I feel like you can tell me if I'm wrong. I feel like those first couple of years, maybe you're kind of sourcing some crazy corks and things like that. Also,
yeah, because a lot of the corks, the natural corks. And all of this is before COVID and just like supply chain meltdowns and shipping just got turned on its head. A lot of that came down to how cool the process was of those corks. Like they were wild cork trees, like processed very minimally and not coated with like a paraffin wax or something. Like they were coated with beeswax and and the people were super cool. And it was just old school. And by the time that I paid for the corks and got them shipped here, it was it was almost half the price than a similar quality of cork would have been from like a distributor in here,
Porto cork or something.
Yeah, like there really aren't too many that make the undyed, like unbleached corks that are just like the natural cork color, and that was like pretty important to me. I've since like found, but man, price of corks is like through the roof now, so it's just constantly trying to find what the best course of action is with that, and also when you play with wild corks harvested by donkeys, then you end up getting a lot more TCA. Who knew? So that was also, an issue and a bummer. I mean, it's such a bummer when, So I've switched to a little bit more reasonable corks. I had like thought about doing the supposedly compostable kind of plastic ones that are made from sugar cane or some shit like that.
Oh, right.
And then I was like on the beach and one just like was washed up on the shore. And I like the idea of it just being like wood that rots
Okay.
and goes away. You know,
Mm-hmm.
my like impact of I'd like it to be as like little as possible on this planet in whatever, you know, in whatever way I can. Yeah, plastic just drives me crazy. Yep, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a big issue. Did you just kind of grow Zumo kind of organically the next
Well,
couple years? I mean, you're still working at Ordinaire and everything, obviously, like day job
yeah,
and
I
stuff, I
mean,
guess. But
yeah, and I mean, it's hard to do any of this winemaking stuff unless you're wicked good at sales and have. I mean, you know, it's a lot of different jobs that you have to be good at in order to complete the package of not needing a day job, I think.
for
But
sure.
um, yeah, the next year, I mean, I had taken the kind of goal for me was like whatever money that it generated, to just kind of throw it back in and see what you could do the next year. The next year I made quite a bit more. It was, yeah, 2019, and yeah, it just like was experimenting with different vineyards. I wanted to find, I wasn't farming anything, and finding fruit that was organic, that was like farmed well was kind of, and was like an interesting, uh, vineyard, was like pretty
Okay.
challenging. I was working with this one vineyard, kind of in like Amador, that was Grenache, but it was like head trained. And so it all seemed pretty cool. But every
Yeah.
time I made wine from those grapes for 2 years, and it was just, it wasn't for me.
Okay.
And so just kind of trying out a bunch of different stuff, and seeing what I like to make. I mean, I had no idea, you know? And so kind of grew the, yeah, brand a little bit. Still, yeah, was working full time when COVID came around. Things had slowed down quite a bit. And then I had this opportunity to take care of this pretty fucking rugged vineyard in Yorkville Highlands in Mendocino.
Okay.
So they let me like set up a little canvas tent in at the top of the hill of the vineyard, and I had all my amenities there, and I could make dinner and charge my phone and do all this. It had like a little solar panel set up and a little sink and kind of like a kitchen, and so I'd live there for I don't know, like 4 days out of the week, and then work the other days, and just kind of got a feel for what the rhythms of a vineyard are like, and how to take care of them, and was working on that with Caleb a little bit, and also Noel a little bit, but we all kind of had our own little areas that we'd take care of.
Oh, okay. Kind of split it up.
And yeah, I mean, it was huge. This place was huge and basically abandoned. It was pretty insane. Wow. And in retrospect, I mean, I was really glad to have had the experience there, just like fucking this place up, because it, you know, didn't end up like turning into a long-term thing. I made one wine from it, and I liked the way it came out, and I wanted to get more serious about farming, and I ended up after that, Donnie from La Onda had an opportunity. We're good friends, and he was just had taken on a farming contract of this vineyard out kind of near here in Grass Valley, and I went out to go visit it, and it was in amazing shape, and was pretty scary the first time rolling through there, like pruning it, because it's a really nice looking vineyard, and it's like kind of right in front of their huge ass house and on the road, and it's like planted in the 80s, has always been organic, has never been tilled, is really cool, and
Nice.
own rooted.
Wow. Okay.
And But I've been taking care of that ever since. And that kind of led me to move the winery out to the Sierra foothills, kind of as like a more holistic project. It just feels really stupid to be driving back and forth 2.5 hours at that time to Grass Valley and working and taking the fruit back to Richmond and then buying some fruit from someone else. And so the project has kind of like evolved more into, I like the limited, because my creative process can kind of go off the rails. And if I have access to too many different varieties, and there were some years I was working with like 6 different grape varieties and just like all the different stuff that you can do with it and da 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 da. And then I like the idea where it's like, no, you get this, and then you just have to you can make all these different wines from these 2 things if you want to, or you can make one thing, and so that's kind of where it's been at, especially because I don't have access to, I don't know, I don't have like forklift or really anything like I had before. And it's been like 2 years of that, and it's been really cool.
I'm going to just step back with it for a second, but what were some of the things that you kind of learned being out in that Yorkville Highlands vineyard for that year? And I guess maybe going on kind of your own path and kind of learning on the job with the pruning, and maybe how you think it kind of showed in the wines, or must have been a hell of a time camping up there for a year.
It was great. Yeah, I mean, it was great. I don't know. I'm pretty, as long as I have, I don't know, like my guitar and just like food to eat and work to do, I'm like pretty satisfied. So I think knowing that was cool. I had, in high school and stuff, I used to do like construction and with my stepdad, and he's an electrician, and played music, and that has its own like fun, like in like tour doing that, and that has its fun sort of performative aspect, and also just like creative outlook, but hard work too. And the cooking, kind of the culmination of all those things landed really well with me with like the farming and the winemaking. Like the farming is it's so hard, thankless, and like nobody gives a shit. Like you can pour wine to people at a wine fair all day long, and you're like, so these are grapes that I farmed, and they're like, like nobody cares or knows even like what that means, or a very small percentage. And it certainly doesn't, with pricing of wine and stuff, it's always so confusing to know how much. You're like, well, I should charge more for the ones that I farmed and maybe less for but the ones that I didn't farm actually cost me more money. I don't know. And it's like, but I think that learning about the rhythm of the seasons of a vineyard, I had never really, I had done piecemeal work in a vineyard with people, but never really, it really does. It's even when people come to help me prune for a little bit, and then there's all these other jobs that nobody even thinks about, like the leaf thinning and like the sort of suckering and all this like really mindless and hard work that isn't nearly as satisfying as pruning, and also at a much more terrible time of year to be working outside. And I guess just learning all that stuff, making huge mistakes in like the pruning of certain vines, and then seeing why that was a mistake when you get to watch it grow out, and just kind of having that whole experimental ground to work on. The people who own the place really, they were just going to rip it up anyway, so they weren't that invested in the like long-term care of their vineyard or really the management of it at all. And just like learning about what it means to actually farm 5 acres of grapes, and how much work that is, and how much time that is, where you mess up, like, oh, I should have gotten to this earlier. It was a great learning experience. And I think that when I came into the much nicer one that up here at Smith Vineyard, it was, I don't know, it prepared me to a lot. I still made mistakes, but I was a lot less. So that was good. It made me look like less of an asshole.
Yeah. So how much are you farming now, and of what?
So now, it's 2.5 acres, the vineyard that I take care of, by myself, which I think I could do like a little bit more. But it would have to be pretty special circumstances. I mean, it's a lot of work to do 2.5 acres, and especially for like things like picking. I mean, picking all the fruit off that much space it's no small task, and organizing people to get together to help you, or to find people to pay to help you pick. And I mean, I'm pretty lucky that I have a pretty cool community of people up here that I will trade them like grapes for picking help, or just like kind of, or pay them. And my friend Andrea up here has been helping me farm that vineyard since I started, and she just started her own little winery in her basement she makes badass wine. So it's
Nice.
pretty cool to do that one. I started to take on a little bit more, but I'm about to have a baby. So this upcoming year, thank you. And I think just this upcoming year, the 2.5 acres is fine for me. And still makes, I don't know, last year, just off of that vineyard, and I bought a half a ton of Riesling from this really sweet lady in Nevada City that I think I'll probably keep working with, but I would love to farm it. But I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. I made like 350 cases from the vineyard, which is plenty to keep me busy, especially right now. Sales are pretty slow, I think, for everybody, and just in general, the space for, I don't know, just alcohol. Honestly, a lot of people are changing their minds about how they feel about alcohol, which is fine. So yeah, for now, the 2.5 acres is cool. Last year, I took over farming of it's like another 2.5 acres of a vineyard that's in the town that I live in. And Gideon from Close to Rhone had made a wine from there, I don't know, maybe about 10 years ago, that I had tried that I thought was really good. And I'd been looking for the vineyard for years, and found the people, and my friend who also makes wine up here, who's part of my community, George, he really found them, and he's wicked good at like Facebook and all this other shit, and finding country bumpkins and but I ended up and worked on that last year. It got completely eaten by by all of the above, by deer and birds and bears. So we will, I'm not going to keep doing it over there just because of the baby. And it's a lot of work. We had to it hadn't been pruned in 3 or 4 years, and was just a mess, but a beautiful place. Like, holy shit. And the wine that Gideon made from there, it was Gewürztraminer, and it was bomb. It was like unbelievably exuberant. In the vineyard that I farm now, it's Syrah and Primitivo, which is Zinfandel, but the people that own the place. And it is a little, because I have farmed Zinfandel too, and I mean, there's so many different clones of all these things that, it's one clone of Zinfandel, and it is pretty different and really lovely to work with. Is kind of like it makes a lot of different wines. Like if you pick it ripe, then it makes like a very sort of spicy, peppery Very rustic red with pretty soft tannins, all things considered. I mean, I do pretty long macerations and and it's fine. Or if you pick it really early, you can make these really tropical kind of light either reds or rosés. I've been making rosé because I don't have a lot of access to white fruit anymore, and I really drink a lot of white wine. So it's mainly my own wanting to drink. I mean, Diego or Sean from Le Lune were. When I asked them, I was like, "You got any advice? I'm starting my wine thing," and they were like, "Just make wine that you like to drink because you're going to have a shitload of it." And that's what they said, and so, and I don't think that's bad advice. So I always try and make wine that I like. So I have been making a lot of rosé from there, and there is the whole vineyard was planted to Chenin Blanc, own rooted Chenin Blanc, and the owners gradually grafted Syrah and Primitivo over the Chenin because they had so much issue with mildew on the Chenin, and the frost pressure is pretty high. It's at like 2,800 feet.
Oh wow!
So
that's pretty high elevation.
It's high for Grass Valley, and I don't really understand it. It's even living here for over a year. Like I don't really understand why. But when I pull out my little altimeter thing, it's like that's what it says. And so by that I mean my phone. So it ends up getting some pretty serious frost pressure. White grapes are just pretty brutal. They just bud out so much earlier than the Syrah or the Primitivo. So the whole thing is Chenin. So when Primitivo or a Syrah dies and I train up from the rootstock, it becomes a Chenin vine.
Okay.
I've managed to get like a barrel out of it. So out of the Chenin. So that's also there
that's
too.
A decent amount then. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not bad. I mean, you have to it's like playing Where's Waldo. You kind of have to walk through the whole vineyard. There's no real efficient way to pick it or anything. So,
yeah. So slowly being sort of interplanted more or less with Chenin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that's been, I don't know. It's been fun to work with. I love Syrah. That was kind of the main draw for me. There's another block that Donnie farms. And I used to farm half of that as well, and it was Cab and Merlot.
Okay.
But Cabernet is just a really challenging grape to farm. It'll like just crush your soul. It's like so vigorous and really wants to just grow like crazy. So once you're done pruning, you pretty much have to immediately start shoot thinning. And once you're done shoot thinning, you just have to do it 2 or 3 more times. And it just was a real time suck. I loved Cabernet though. I mean, the power of Cabernet and just it has an incredible ability to like, it's almost like a natural sulfite or something. It ends up really grounding the wine with this, like with its sort of structure in a way that makes wines that otherwise wouldn't be as stable, pretty stable. And yeah, I don't know. I have an affinity for it, and I've made some wine from it, but they're still aging. I don't know. I just kind of went old school on all the big reds from there, and I just like aged them for, I think now like 4 years is my like.
Okay, 4 years 4 years in the barrel, and then some in bottle.
Yeah, with like topping it up and stuff, but just mainly trying not to open it.
Okay.
I had to bottle a bunch when I moved all my stuff from Richmond up to here, but still managed to move some that are undisturbed and hopefully didn't get too shocked in their travel.
What was it that kind of drew you to the foothills? I know you've worked in a couple different areas of you'd said you'd helped Caleb with some farming in more the Calaveras area, and gotten some fruit from Rorick over there also, and now you're a little further north. What's the vibe or grapes you like? What kind of drew you there?
There are like a lot of different reasons. The soil is really interesting out here, and if you talk to like anybody, California is a great place to grow grapes. Like no matter where you're at, I'm like very, I don't know, pretty pro California wine, and so I don't think that you can really make like a bad choice and focusing in like a region. And I think that everybody has their own reasons. And for me, the rocks and the soil and the freaking gold rush was here. So there's like pretty interesting geological shit. I mean, and I see it constantly in just these different, you work in these vineyards and you're just covered in iron, like, rusty iron and decomposed granite. And like, it's just like orange, and I think between the uniqueness and the sort of severity of the climate and the severity of life, I also thought was really cool. After tasting a bunch of wines from up here too, between like what Donnie makes and like Frenchtown Farms or Gideon or Arkeel later on, like just started having some of his wines. And I don't know, it's unique. I think that the acidity to like, and everybody always talks about how that wherever they're growing grapes, they think they have the best acidity for whatever reason it is that, they've come up with for their, and for me, it's here is where the best acidity is in this kind of weird part of the foothills. And I think that it's underrepresented to a certain extent. And there's a lot of confusion. I mean, so often people will be like, oh, I'll come visit you, and then I'll go see Hank, and then I'll go see Matthew. And I'm like, that would literally take you like 4 days, Like we're not. And so for me, this area, like the kind of like general, like Nevada County or like San Juan Ridge, like proper, I mean, we're like basically in Sierra County, or like Downeyville, and like it's just so pretty and weird out here. And the really kind of good summers and the snow. I mean, it snowed like crazy at my vineyard in Grass Valley a couple years ago, to the point where I couldn't even work in the vineyard. I was trying to go prune, and there was 1.5 feet of snow in the vineyard, which was pretty unusual for Grass Valley. I mean, where I live now got like 7 feet of snow in that storm. So I think I really missed seasons too after living in the Bay for so long. And I love Sonoma. I love all my friends who live in Sonoma. I love to visit them. I love Mendocino. It's like everywhere has these really special little reasons why they're great. And for me, on top of just, I thought it being a really great place to grow grapes because of the soil. And it's important, I think, to focus on a place that you can feel comfortable with and know and understand the grapes. I mean, that's what all these French winemakers that people idolize and shit, like there are people who will never make another wine that's not Gamay in their entire life.
Right.
From their own, family's plot, like, and just make wine from the same exact vineyard, and the wine's good, because they know the place, they know the grape, they know the vineyard. And I think that you can make exceptional wine from any vineyard, as long as you just consistently keep at it. You learn so much. So I kind of just had to pick a spot, and me and my partner really liked it out here, and we had been already spending a bunch of time out here because I'd been farming the vineyard. And so I just kind of put my eggs in the basket of the Sierras for personal reasons, and the potential of really exceptional wine here. And I think that I've been making some stuff that's been really great and learning about the area. I think I've been making some stuff that's maybe not so great, then also learning, and then making some stuff that I'm like, wow, I can't believe this is not what I expected, because um, you can pretend like you have so much control over wine. I mean, especially if you're not working with sulfite, there's really not much you can do. You can be like, okay, I'm gonna press it off today. Okay, I'm gonna leave it there. Okay, I'm gonna do whatever. But you kind of don't really know the wine until it's dry, it's pressed off, it's sat for a second, it's lived in your house or your garage or your winery space or wherever the fuck you make wine. And it's kind of like getting to know a roommate or something, Like you can interview the grapes and the wines and be like, okay, I think you'll be excellent as a red wine, and I'm gonna sell it at this price and have it be a cool, fresh, light red wine. But truth of the matter is, you could have a year like last year where everything is like 18 bricks, and then 3 days later it's all like 25. And so all your plans go out the window, and you don't. So you don't really know a wine until it's done. And I try to do my best to just insert myself when I can, but for the most part, allow the process to just do its thing. And yeah, so yeah,
Learning how those vineyards work on I guess a year to year basis. You've been up there for what, has it been 2 harvests purely up there?
of making, 2 harvests, which, is like, that has all its own challenges. I mean, I don't have a forklift. I live basically a mile up a dirt road that's just straight up. I mean, it's not the same logistics of just like pulling in your big rental truck into a parking lot and forklifting things off the back. It's like, how the fuck am I going to get this thing up the driveway? And the kind of, and when it happens, you're like, geez, I really earned the beer that I had on the way here. You can't, but yeah, it's been really fun. And it certainly, has its challenges, but there were a few things that when I started making wine that were like really important to me, was just like learning how to farm the grapes and actually having a relationship with it. Didn't really expect that I would ever have like a long-term like lease that with a good relationship with anybody, because very few people have that. And being in a place where it's set up the way that I want it to be, and to be able to make wine honestly alone in a building in the woods has been like my dream. And so a lot of that came true. And so the new space has been wonderful. But it is like rustic, and I've had to learn how to do all kinds of crazy shit to be able to just like get things running. And the basic struggles with that. And being out here is hard because everybody idealizes, like, I mean, some of the coolest people, like there's like this winemaker in Loire Valley, Patrick Duplat, who like makes like these amazing, super cerebral, sometimes really challenging, but sometimes really absurdly phenomenal wines. And he's like a very strange, quiet, but like eccentric person who just gets to live, in his little hut and his like cave in France, and all these people sell his wine for him and talk about how great he is, and do all this stuff, and he just gets to live his life. Whereas here in the bootstrap America, we gotta, if you don't have a fucking TikTok and you're on Instagram every day talking about all this stuff and and it's like such a challenging thing being an American winemaker, but like it's just so different, such a different set of rules, And so I don't get to go to the city, to the bars, and to hang out to make the sales and stuff like that. You get taken out of the community, but then at the same time, people think that that's what makes a good wine sometimes too. It's like antithetical. I don't know.
Yeah. Do you see that changing or evolving at all for American winemakers or California winemakers, I guess, as far as
I don't know.
conversation and selling the wines?
There's been like a push for sure. I mean, I think that there's been certainly in the past 10 years. I mean, when I moved out here, there was like only a handful of people that you could consider remotely natural winemakers making wine in California. And within the past 5 years, that's got to have grown to, I don't even know how many, I mean, multiplied, and not everybody makes it through. I mean, it's a really hard hustle, it's like a famously challenging industry to make money in. And the conversation about California wine, I don't know. I don't actually, I mean, it's funny. I love California wine. I drink California wine like as often as probably 99% of the wine that I drink is California wine. When I go out on town with friends, maybe I'll have like, some nice bottles that they think that I would like. I've drank a lot of French wine in my day. I really like it. I've drank a lot of Spanish wine, whatever, like European wine and all wine from all over the place. But there is something that got me about California wine a few years ago where I genuinely like it. And I don't know whether that's because I make it and I drink a lot of my own wine. I mean, so there's that. So maybe it's just like that, like taste has but it's like fun for me when I go to these, like a wine fair or something. It's like really fun for me to trade wine with like the other California wine people and get their wines too. And I think that they're delicious from like my buddy Riley making wine in like LA area, all, up to like Chad making wine in like Oregon, basically like all the wine is good, and all these, they all have their pluses and their minuses. And I think that the market isn't necessarily embracing it. I think California wine has sort of a sloppy reputation in that a lot of the wines are either really uninspiring or like just too crazy for anybody to really drink. And some of my wines fall in the latter category, and I don't know whether that helps anybody out, but I think there was sort of a push to like kind of like people to just like drink more California wine. And for a lot of California winemakers to prop up other California winemakers, I think doesn't happen as much as it should. I think that they try, but everybody treats it like drinking California wine is an extreme sport or something, They're like, I'm on day 6 of drinking only domestics. It's like, that shouldn't be the way we present this conversation. Like, I would happily be on day 6 of drinking domestic wine, Wouldn't even think about it. Like, I wouldn't. And I think that moving past that, I mean, I don't know what the solution is, I mean, I think that competing price-wise with wines from France, I mean, is crazy. I mean, some of the wine that comes over, and I don't even know how the shipping costs can make, and then still for it to be that cheap when just for me to deliver a case, and I don't live very like, handsomely, and I don't, go out to fancy restaurants and shit, and I'm on food stamps and I live in the woods, and I can't sell the wine for that cheap, And I mean, last time that this creep was president, he did put a huge import tax on European wine. And so maybe there'll be a boom for California wine for a little bit. But I don't really see, I mean, as much as I would love to say, I see this like beautiful future where, and it's funny because when you actually work in the service industry and actually serve people and wait on tables or, bartend, a majority of the customer, at least here in California, actually really does want to drink local wine. But it's the people that are the buyers and like that are in charge of these places that really want people to drink these other kinds of things. And I think that they're starting to see that. I hear that every now and then. They're like, oh, that's, we really should have more than just one California wine by the glass. We should have like 5. And I always tried, I think that is a huge way that like people could start drinking more California wine. I mean, but it's funny to say because there is so much California wine by the glass, but it's all bullshit. And, like, I mean, when you go to like a shitty pizza place and they have, whatever Bogle or something, then it's like, that doesn't really count in my mind, but to a certain extent it does. But I think they're owned by like Blackstone Investments anyways or something. So, I mean, supporting local independent winemakers, I think that people should be all about it, like the buyers and the customers. But it's the world we live in. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm all for California wines.
You made some wine
here.
from Tom's grapes. How did you? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I did it probably, man, I haven't the last couple of vintages, but I've made, maybe like 5-6 vintages.
Wow. Cool.
Some Verdelho, some of the Sauvignon Blanc. I think Pinot Gris one year, and I think I did a blend of all 3 of them.
Nice. Yeah.
He'd give me a call like the day after, the main pick happens, basically.
He's like, we got grapes out here if you want to come get them.
Yeah. Come gets what, be like a half row or something of Sauvignon Blanc and a quarter row of Verdelho or something, or some vines
but
that
that's
got missed, so, it adds up to enough for me,
Yeah, for sure. And that's much more fun to work with those kind of limiting factors rather than being like tied to a contract of, I mean, for a while there, I was like buying a lot of grapes from Tom. I mean, I think one year I bought like 12 or 14 tons from him or something. And just it felt like a pressure of just like, I have to grow this business and make it this thing. I mean, I really wanted to quit my day job, but I think that the harsh reality is that, it's just not a great way to make money, which, you can find other ways to do that. And the work is still satisfying. It's just a matter of having 2 jobs, especially winemaking with the farming and stuff is a whole other thing. But just like, getting the last rows of, of something is really great. Like gleaning the grapes. I mean, there was a lot of gleaning opportunities this past year because nobody made a lot of wine this past year. And there were just grapes galore from what I could understand. But I stayed the hell away from those things.
Yeah, I mean, it worked for me because I'm just making it for myself. And so, you end up with something a little different each year. So I just don't end up with Zinfandel on top of Zinfandel on top of Zinfandel on top of Zinfandel. As much as I like Zinfandel or Syrah or whatever it is, it just, I can kind of switch it up a little bit because I'm doing it just for myself,
Yeah, which, to a certain extent, I do make wines to sell them and like think about what people are going to like. But it is always important to, like, if you ever did want to scale up your, wine practice, to never stop doing that. Like, just, continue to make wine that you would, as if you were making it for yourself. Because for better or for worse, I kind of think it's the only way to really show, what you're doing as opposed to paying, what everyone else is doing. And kind of like when you follow a trend or if I made some experimental wine and then I try and do it again, I always say that I can like literally never make the same wine twice, even if I do it. You can pretend like you're making the same wine twice, but you just never know, and there's so many factors. And I think that it's just, it's good to, and that's like peaceful to me, just like letting it go to what it wants to be, and that usually, it's like that's what's been cool about cutting down to just stuff that I have control over. Is even if it is just like all the same stuff that, and it's just more of it. And I mean, with the Syrah, sometimes I literally have no idea what the fuck to do with it, but I just have to make wine from it. And I am always really happy, and the sort of like necessity being the mother of invention or whatever kind of works into that, where I think that that's like the creative space that we need in our little community of independent and semi-radical natural winemakers working in California. Is we're not Spain, we're not Germany, we're not France, we're California. And I think working with what you have and working with what has, I mean, everybody's stories always like falls under these like, well, that's what I could get access to, so that's what I made it. And everybody wants it to be like this romantic, like, ever since I was a child, I loved Le Grain or whatever. And that's why I've been making Le Grain. When it's like, no, like that just seemed like an interesting grape that you could get your hands on. And obviously there are like some outliers that everybody's like wants, like Gamay from whatever, like all this other shit. But ultimately, like if you just are happy and it represents California, and I think, I don't know, like Sauvignon Blanc's not like the hippest, coolest grape in the world, but I think it grows amazing in California. And I think the Sauvignon Blanc, depending on how, I mean, I like it really ripe from Tom's, and I've made like wine from there that was like unbelievable, and I don't know, I think like taking ownership of just like that necessity. We don't have control over what these people planted for God knows what reason, 40 years ago in California, because they, like now there's Malbec freaking everywhere because they planted it, when everybody, all they wanted to do was drink Malbec. And who the hell wants to make Malbec, But there are people out there that are going to do it, and they're going to, I mean, Aaron and Kara have access to this vineyard, and they've been farming it that has a shitload of Malbec, and they've been making wine that's pretty good from Malbec up here in the Sierra foothills. And I think that, I wish I was just making 5 gallons of shit from Tom's yard that I grabbed after everybody was done. But I still try and embrace that, I try and treat every batch like that, because that's, I think, the best, purest form of, I don't know, just expression, and polite to do to the customer too, and to the people drinking it and who are enjoying it.
I think maybe you kind of said it in some different words. You can correct me if I'm wrong, of course, but it seems like California sometimes kind of apologizes a little bit for being California, or for being, for not being France or Italy.
Yeah.
And I don't, especially, I don't think it's right, I guess, to do that. Like it is California. It's not France or Italy.
Exactly. It's
I don't think
thousands of miles away. Yeah. It just so happens that we have grapes and they have grapes, and certainly the tradition. I mean, who the fuck actually knows? I mean, like like where I live is this is all these stories and stuff, everybody's got this like history and shit, but I don't know how true. I mean, because what's funny about it, okay, so the Yuba River, I live on the Yuba River, and the Nisenan, the indigenous people in this area, called it the Uba River, which we call it the Yuba River, which Uba means grape, I guess, to them, but which I also think is weird because it really is like a colonial, then it's like, well, uva is grape, Right. So that's kind of like too weird to me. But I mean, it is crazy there. I mean, so they could have been making, I mean, the one thing I will tell you that chalks out just in general, so it could have been the colonizing people from Spain and shit going out here. All along the Yuba River, there is an absurd amount of native grape. And I mean, the problem with the native grapes are the bunches are like 5 berries, like in a good bunch, you know?
Yeah, a little scraggly
And
bunches.
yeah. But Andrea, my friend out here who helps me, she always like has a day where she's just hiking up and down the river out here and then makes enough wine to basically fill like a growler, you know?
Okay.
And there's no, I mean, it ferments and it makes wine. And so maybe, you know, I mean, they could have been making wine previous to European intervention in this area. I don't fucking know. You know, I mean, they certainly were using grapes for lots of medicinal and reasons or even just eating them. But I think when, yeah, like the apology about like, it's like, well, you know, we're here, so it's just so hot and the sun and so I pick really early and then I like to do like a carbonic maceration because it's just so hot and it's like what the fuck, like, so yeah, that's always kind of bothered me, and something that was pretty inspiring from just helping Caleb and Tony and Nick out at his place, which
at Sonoma Mountain.
I don't know if you have had the chance to, up in Glen Ellen, that Tony's place is just, it was a really cool place. And I mean, and Tony is not a guy who's like scared of ripeness, you know, like his, to a fault, sure. You know, I mean, to be honest, but when, just like the power of those wines, and honestly, sometimes some of the wines I've had up at Tony's, I mean, it's a pretty special thing. Like drinking some of those wines sometimes and being like, oh shit, you know what? You're right. Like this tastes amazing. And it's 16% alcohol and like completely blown out and like so insane. But this wine is delicious. And I could drink this very quickly and finish a bottle of it, you know? And I think that ultimately, and every wine has its own circumstance, but you know, that's the judge of a good bottle of wine is whether it's like empty or not, you know, like if you go to these at tastings and all these, you know, dinners and wine things, like it's always a little awkward when there's like wines that have hardly been touched, you know, you're like, that one must not be good, you know, or people are scared of it, you know, one way or the other. But I always try and embrace the heat and working with Tom was really fun because everybody was so scared of picking those grapes too late. And everybody be like, yeah, acidity is going to start falling off. And I can't believe you. And I mean, and it's just, there are some grapes that sure, that's the case, but I don't know. I'd be measuring pH on some of the grapes that I'd get from there. I would get things like, sometimes at like 23 and a half, like 24 bricks out of his vineyard and add them back to stuff that was like closer to like 20 or 21. And it was just good, like tasting the sunshine and tasting California. And like when I do long macerations, I don't destem. I just like always do whole cluster, stomp them. And with red wines, we'll let them sit sometimes for a month, maybe sometimes a month and a half. I mean, I like to let things ferment until they're dry, which would happen a hell of a lot faster in Richmond than it does out here. Right. As it just gets very cold at night, which has also been really cool. I've been able to stretch some of these fermentations out for like quite a long time. And I think that people need to be less scared of California wine and stop acting like it's different than anything else. It's just its own thing. I mean, there are places in Italy that are just as hot as here that remind me of California wine, like wine from like Umbria and shit, like tastes like California wine and it's good, you know? And I think that if there's just some crossover into that, it would be good, but everybody's just got to stop apologizing for what it is and just be loud and proud about it. And I'm not the most outspoken person, so I'm hardly one to be like preaching about it, but I think that, yeah, it'd be cool if more people were just like totally psyched about California wine and they were like cool and like sought after. But for the time being, you know, but I think there are people making amazing wine here. Like,
There are, for sure. Yeah. You're using mostly whole cluster, but stomping for the reds?
yes, and the whites too. I pretty
Okay.
much treat everything exactly the same. I kind of like adopted a philosophy like years ago that I've just like kind of stuck with it. I've changed the format like a little bit, but like direct pressing always stresses me out. I feel like the times that I have direct pressed, the wines are just so much more fragile, and they don't have all the nutrients from the skins and that's like the placenta of the of the wine, like it needs to feed off of these nutrients that the plant gave to it, and at least have them fall out and some solid matter from those, the pectins and the other shit inside the skins and that gooey layer that's between the juicy part. And I just feel like all that stuff is so good for fermentation. And I'm sure that there's science to back that, but just for me, it's just been through personal experience. And so I always foot stomp them, let them rest. I cover them. I usually use like really thick, I try and seal I basically, after they're stomped, seal the fermentation and try and not fuck with it for as long as I can possibly hold out. And that includes like, I don't really love excessive punch downs unless you really want a super extracted wine. I think that they're completely unnecessary. And I then we'll press things off. I like to press things while they're fermenting to have like the security, the CO2 security blanket in place. I just think like working with a lot of people will have dry ice or even just gassing things while they're pressing, or I've seen people straight up have dry ice just in the colander coming out of the press. Like,
Are you sealing? Are you using dry ice when you seal the fermenters?
No, there's no need.
Okay.
They make. It. So I work part time in a brewery right now, and we have a CO2 reader inside the brewery, and it's actually been really fascinating for me because I've worked in winery spaces for so long, where that's never been a thing. And the brewer made this really high ABV, like imperial stout thing. And I walked into the brewery and I was like, holy shit, like the CO2 levels in here are heavy duty. Like I smelled it. And that was just something which would have been the equivalent of maybe an 18 bricks wine.
Oh, wow. Okay. Mm-hmm.
And so when I started to think about, and then I looked at the CO2 meter, and the parts per million of CO2 in the air at that moment were really quite lethal. And so then I really started to think back. I was like, shit, man. So then all this other stuff that I've been fermenting inside that's, 22, 23, 24 bricks. And, and I'm just like working inside that space.
Yeah.
The wine kicks off so much CO2 that, you can... I used to spray a little bit just at the beginning before the CO2 really started to create itself. But honestly, I never saw any difference in it being helping me in any way, shape, or form. I think the more times that you fuck with it, the more opportunity there is for bad bacteria to take over. I think sometimes... Yeah, but for the most part, just trying to trap the CO2, pressing it off, and then I usually ferment in either barrels or in like big tanks, like whatever I can get my hands on. Like I wish I had a storeroom full of beautiful vessels to ferment in, but I've got like a couple stainless steel tanks that are probably the most beautiful things that I have, and then the rest is just like huge plastic tanks that are pretty much, which I use for fermentation, and then I try and like for élevage and stuff, I put things into barrels or the stainless tanks.
Okay.
And then I let things sit for usually over the winter and then try to start bottling in the spring. But it's always a matter of having them enough cash flow to buy the bottles. And then when I have enough money to buy bottles, then I bottle.
Right. Yeah, I was going to ask you, I guess, that question where you tend to bottle everything pretty early, it seems like.
I've bottled things early. I've bottled things late.
Okay.
I've kind of done. I've tried it all. I think there's. I don't know. It's all over the place. I wish.
Yeah.
I think there's some. There is some like advantage to bottling some certain wines earlier than
Okay.
other wines. But yeah, I mean, I wish I had the privilege to choose when I bottle wines, but it really just ends up becoming a financial, like the price of glass has gone up so much and then it kind of came down and it kind of came back, but it's never really reached. I mean, it used to be like $4.50 a case or something, and now it's like 10 or 12.
Right.
So it's just a big difference. And then, just all the packaging, the labels. And I used to hand print all the labels, which was way more affordable than getting them printed, but printing them onto paper, cutting them all out, and then like using glue to like put them on the bottle was like pretty labor intensive.
Sure.
But yeah, it's usually, I mean, with bottling, I try to bottle wine when it tastes good. Like sometimes I always try and have at least 100 cases of empty glass on hand. Because I never really make more than that of any cuvee. And I'll go through, taste a bunch of stuff, and then if I start like really feeling something, then I'm like, well, maybe I should bottle this, when it tastes like wine. I mean, the bottling thing without using sulfite, I think there's the big like difference, and like, just the challenge, because you can bottle wine that tastes amazing, but I mean, it's very, very rare that you have a bottle of wine, regardless of how good it is, that right after you bottled it, if you bottled it without sulfite, that it's going to taste good the next day or the next week, and it will come around. But usually, I've had some that didn't, and I didn't, it's a whole other, and it's just like a whole other process, like the whole bottling without sulfite thing. And because sometimes, I mean, the wine tastes really crazy, and I have friends who I'll convince them to make a little bit of wine without sulfite, and they're like, wow, it's actually really not been that big of a deal. And I'm like, fuck yeah, I've just like converted another person over to my side of the fucking hellhole that I live in. And then and then they fucking bottle it, and then they're like, Diego, the wine is shitty as fuck. This is the mousiest thing I've ever had. It tastes so bad. Like, and I'm like, just let it sit. Like, like, don't worry, it's gonna come
for
around
6 months.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it can come around a little sooner, but yeah, for sure, I do think that and so one thing that I have been doing as of late that I would say is like a consistent thing with bottling is I do just like to hang on to things for like a year or before I release them, even if I bottled them kind of early, unless it's like very special circumstances. Where I have like some kind of unicorn wine that for some reason didn't get fucked up when I bottled it and is ready to go. And I'm like, oh, great, I can sell this and finally pay my rent, And so it's like all over the place. But I do think that it's important, especially if you're not going to work with sulfites to let things chill. Like a lot of people want them to get them out and just sell it. And then I'm like, well, it might taste good today, but then wait until next week when everybody's calling you up being like, why does this taste like Fritos? And then you're like, fuck, and I think letting it chill is good. And both, people used to just expect the wine shops and the distributors would do it for them. They'd be like, well, of course the wine's not ready to drink. It's only been in bottle for a month. And you're like, well, why'd you sell it? And I just think that is like kind of rude. And although it really hurts cash flow, I do think that like in terms of just like the integrity of, especially wines without sulfite, and the integrity of them, and I've certainly been guilty of this, but releasing a wine that really isn't ready and that tastes crazy does nobody any services if they're trying to legitimize either California wine or California wine without sulfite in it, And I think holding on to stuff is like, it's a privilege that I think most people they have to do it, and especially if you're making wine without sulfite. And so I just, I've just been holding on to stuff, which gives you a lot of time to design the label if you're also the label designer like myself.
I feel like I've seen that a bit more last couple of years, though. People kind of holding on to them, maybe not releasing the wines quite as early. I think it seems like there's been a turn, at least from my point of view. But
I think there has been too. I think in general, more people are just realizing that it makes such a big difference if you just hold on to it for 6 months, sell it then, rather than selling it even in 2 months, and then you're like, it's there, I think it's good, and then then you sell it, and then everybody's like, because once one person, that works at a shop or works at a restaurant or something, and then they talk to their friends, they're like, oh yeah, don't drink that one, it's mousy. Then it just stays on the shelf for like the rest of eternity, and then it has no value, and I think that sucks, and because if people are afraid of it, that's bad for business.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. What's the best place for people to get your wines?
Great question. I am always down if you live in California. I don't ship wine out year round, but you can always either DM me on Instagram at Zumo Wine or send me an email to zumowine@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to sell wine direct. I love doing that. It's kind of the best way to support an independent winemaker like myself, because there's no middleman, and I give you a good deal. And I ship, but I also will like deliver to people in like the Bay Area. But if you want to just go somewhere and buy it, they usually have a good selection of my wines at Ordinaire, where I used to work, and also at Ruby in San Francisco, at Horsey's Saloon in San Francisco, at Gemini Bottle Shop, they sell the wine in San Francisco, Alkali Rye in Oakland, Punchdown, and I have been selling this can of wine that I made a few years ago at Sobaichi for years now, and their food is great there. Also at Sobaichi, and probably some other places I'm forgetting about, which, sorry. Hopefully people listen to this and they're like, that guy's crazy or that guy's cool. And I don't know. One day, stop drinking California wine like it's an extreme sport, and it's just drinking wine. It's tasty. It's good.
Thanks for listening today. Diego has continued making great wines in Yuba. I love Diego's take on supporting California wines, and when you do that, most of the money goes right back to your local producers, the same ones we hear from on this and other podcasts. You can follow Diego at Zumo Wine on Instagram or go to zumowine.com. You can follow the podcast on wherever you're listening and the Instagram at Indie Wine Podcast. Feel free to email indiewinepodcast@gmail.com with comments, questions, or feedback. If you're enjoying the podcast, I'd love it if you told a friend or wine lover about it and help spread the word. Rating, reviewing, or donating at patreon.com/indiewinepodcast helps too. It all goes to offsetting podcast expenses and allows for more episodes. We'll be back soon with another episode. Have a good one.